and it is a pleasure to see you in the room and to see some people also online. Now interested in knowing a bit more about the perspectives of some of our colleagues and young Europeans and young people who are with us to think about MyEurope today. Just for those who are not in Gubbio, we were surprised by rain, so that we had to change the room, and there we are in a different place now. Sometimes it seems to be raining in Gubbio and not only being hot. So the idea of this conversation is just to engage in a roundtable to think about what Europe could be, is, what we are afraid of, and so on and so forth. And we have decided to give it the title MyEurope. And maybe I start with Gloria with a provocative question. MyEurope, is it really your Europe? And shouldn't it be maybe our Europe instead of MyEurope? Or do you think it is their Europe? So what is your stand on that? Now we have to switch on the microphone and all these kind of things.
So I think this is a complex question in the sense where Europe is a place where many inhabit. Some of them are nationalists, some of them are residents, some of us are just visiting, some of us are just working. And I think that it's still one Europe, and I think that just to affirm what I'm saying, if you look, for example, at the treaties that that serve for the functioning of the European Union, that these treaties provide for hypothesis for people that are just moving through, people that are going to reside, people that are going to visit. So on many grounds, I think that even the construction of these treaties can serve to show that Europe has been construed to be our Europe, whether you're a national, a resident, or even a citizen.
And for those who are not familiar yet with you, can you just say from which standpoint you are speaking? So you are a student in France, but you are not originally from France or not always from France. Just a word on that, maybe?
So I'm born and I was born and lived in South Africa, but I'm originally from the Republic of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, but I was educated in the French system, the French baccalaureate, and I now study in Lille, where I'm still living.
Okay, thank you very much. And I will continue with the same question because it's really tricky to know whether it's just my Europe or our Europe. And maybe I ask Gabriel, and maybe you also introduce yourself with a short notice on your biography.
Okay, I'm Gabriel, I'm from Madrid, Spain, I'm studying law, and my thoughts about your question, I think we should think about what is Europe before to consider after. What is Europe? We could say, for example, equality, some values as equality, some values as solidarity, some values as like respecting human dignity. So I think maybe this could be a tricky question, but also maybe this is an easy question to answer, because as far as we are all together respecting this and connecting with this, it's no problem. We are all Europe, and not only the born in Europe, the people coming from Europe, as far as we are in the same sphere and atmosphere, I think we are in the same level. Yeah.
And when we are talking about Europe, we had this problem several times already. We sometimes mix up what we mean, not only in terms of a definition, like values behind and so on, but sometimes we speak of Europe in the sense of the European Union, and sometimes in the sense of Europe as a continent or as the extension of a continent. Maybe Doris, as you are certainly from Europe, but probably not yet from the European Union, you might also say a word on that.
Hello, everyone. For those who don't know, I'm Doris, and I'm from Albania. I'm born and raised, and also most of my education is Albanian-based. So that's why the question from Peter. The first day, it was kind of a question to be answered, and a question that I also asked the professors and everyone present during the summer school. What do we want to define as Europe or European in a way? Because geographically speaking, Albania is part of Europe, but and also culturally a good cultural base of it, because we have influences of Italian base or even Greek base that are part of the European Union. But of course, when we want to talk about the shared history, Albania falls a bit into the another part of it, which it has its tricky past and everything. So when we return to MyEurope, our Europe, or how that works, I think that we have to answer, like, even as Albania trying to be in the European Union, we have to answer like our Europe. Like, it's not only mine, because Albania is not yet part of the European Union, but our, because we share the desire to be part of a larger organization that it is built, as Gabriel said, on dignity, equality, and also this sense of partnership and communication and peace. But we as Albanians have to, or as Albanians as a society or an institution or a legal standpoint and everything, we have to build up and become better in a way, to be not only to fit to this European, but to be more prepared, to be more of an active role, active participant. So, sorry. No, so yeah, it's okay. So it's a thing that we have to work on, and I think that Albania can be a really active actor in this kind of setting.
And now you have to switch off your, exactly. The interesting thing is that you say how we fit into the project, right? And contribute to the project as a country which is not yet there. So we have, on the one hand, we know, you are sure, no one has doubt that Albania belongs to Europe, but the European Union Club has something special asking for, and maybe we should find out a bit about what that means for the European project and for European values and European humanism. And we see this question very actively, I would say, in the Ukrainian case in the moment. And that's why we might now hear to Anastasia.
Hi everyone, my name is Asya. I come from Ukraine. Originally, I was born and brought up in Kyiv, but I've been living in Lviv for 2 years now. As a student of Ukrainian Catholic University, I do cultural studies, and that is why when we're talking about my, our, their, the first thing that I want to bring up to your attention is the context. Because on one hand, in terms of this school, I think we're talking about MyEurope, in terms that we construct identities not only from the inside, but from the outside too. And that's why it is important to have diversity. That's why it is important to have people that can say MyEurope, even though they geographically, let's say, don't belong to the project. Because to construct an identity, we have to see the opinions and see the critique coming from different sides. And also the problem and the issue and this tricky thing with MyEurope consists in that part that although we are communicating here as an individuals and we are supposed to represent our countries, it is really difficult to represent something so diverse and something so different as the whole country by being just one person, because we have different education, we have different backgrounds. Even before I came to the summer school, I was thinking about how can I talk about Ukraine if it's just me, because, for example, I didn't engage so actively in volunteering. My job was mostly considered and mostly connected to cultural studies, cultural activities. I wasn't on a frontier. My home wasn't destroyed. So there are millions of stories, and I think that we are here to introduce them. We're a gateway representation to this diversity and this fragmentation that Europe actually is. But then Doris made a really good point on the significance of Europe as our project in each country, because it is a value, or it is an image, or it is a fantasy that we as a country decide to make our priority or not priority. And when we had our first lecture in the summer school, and we were asked the question, what makes you feel European? I decided to answer, because we decided to call us so. We decided to define us and identify us as Europeans, and it was a collective decision for my country and for Europeans. And so it is really interesting that as soon as you go from my to our to there, it's changing on whose behalf you are speaking on, or we are speaking. And also this idea that the Peter mentioned, that we can contribute to the project, even though, like, for example, we'll take not Europe but the European Union. And it is really interesting how sometimes you can not only contribute but change, just with your example. Thank you.
Yeah, and you raise several very important questions. Starting from this one: in which name are we entitled to speak when we speak of our? Can you actually speak in the name of all Ukraine? And certainly, when it comes to Europe, things get even more complicated, and our Europe would be composed of many different Europes. And you also mentioned the importance of the context in which we are speaking, and we might come back to this. But with Pierre, we have a fifth member of the table, who is, in a certain sense, actually not from Europe, but your university decided to be part of the European Federation of Catholic Universities, and I would just like to ask you to speak a bit about that.
So, good evening, everyone. I'm Pierre Dakash. I'm from Lebanon. So, talking about MyEurope, I can't call it MyEurope because I'm from the Middle East, and so that's it. But as my colleague Gloria said before, I am French educated since school, since I was a child, and so I studied my whole life in Lebanon, the same as my French colleagues here studied in France. So we have the same path, if you want. So I can't call it my Europe, but I can call it our Europe, because I'm always ready to help, because we can't deny the fact that Europe plays a huge role in this world. So if I can help, I will help. And I'm also learning from Europe to help my region. So that's it in general. Thank you.
I was very much impressed in the morning when you spoke about what your generation has already done or is planning to do to the religious diversity and the in Lebanon. Could you just explain a bit which kind of community you are imagining being then after Lebanon, when your generation is no longer pointing to the religious differences, and what you are dreaming of in this sense?
Yeah, as I told earlier this morning, Lebanon has been always a country that is really based on religion. The politics in Lebanon is related to religion, and the government is divided in a religious way too. So that's a fact that happened just after the war, in order to maintain some, they called it peace between religion and Lebanon. But we are finding with time that this is not the solution, because all the problem in this government are leading to religious problems and some rebellious clashes on the roads and a lot of manifestations. And my generation really woke up. It's been like 2019. We have the revolution in Lebanon, and we had more than 1 million people on the streets for 1 month, for a straight 1 month. But we do not have the support in order to continue this mission. I can call it a mission, to get rid of this corrupted political system in my country. But we are trying and still trying, and the elections really helped. Like a month ago, the independents in my country are now as much as a normal political party, traditional political party in Lebanon. So the numbers are really changing. It needs more time. We couldn't do a lot of difference in big decisions until now, but little by little we will do it and hope to have a better government and a better country.
Yeah, and we were addressing the question, in whose name are you entitled to speak? And you now speak in the name of a generation who wants to change things. And you are referring to another situation in which people say, I'm entitled to speak in the name of a religion. So communities are built in many different ways, right? Communities of religion, of generations. We are very frequently and easily held for being German or being Spanish or being Ukrainian, and so addressing the national component. But all this comes together when we are discussing, and that are the troubles that we are having in our summer school to find out which of the ways will lead us to what could be the European humanism. But I thought it could be an interesting exercise to try to think about the European Union now. Concretely speaking, this 27 or how many members that we are in the moment, and what would be the added value when it comes to Europe, this one that we are discussing as a European humanism and so on and so forth. Do you understand my question? So why could the European Union as a project be let's say a concretization or special approach to the phenomenon of Europe? Do you have any idea, Gloria?
I believe that it's a special approach because, in a sense, it's not just about narrative. It's not about things that are loose. We can speak, we can have a plethora of texts, we can have conferences, but when things are not binding, there's actually no ground on which we can affirm that we're really united in peace. And I think that the European Union, being an institutionalized forum, really allows for the concretization of what is Europe, a European Union, where we interact in diversity, where it's no longer a question of borders, but it's a question of a common border. It's a question of treaties that actually remind us of our obligation every single day, that we said we would work together to have a common customs union. We said we would work together in order to cultivate human dignity, peace, democracy. And we see that that is a joint effort because, for example, this year when the rights of women in Poland or in Hungary, the independence of the judiciary in Hungary were heavily, threatened, we saw that it wasn't a national problem. It was actually a European problem. It sparked outrage all over the Union. And so in that sense, the European Union is a particular approach, not only because it's binding, it's a reminder that you guys committed when you joined the Union to have a democratic state, to provide for human rights, to participate in the forums where each and every one of you are equally represented. And I think it's much bigger than just a simple realization mentally. It's a concretization that has been standing over time and that can continue to stand over time if we continue respecting these obligations. So what I'm trying to say essentially is that where there's no obligation and where there's no binding symbol, there is actually nothing.
Gabriel, do you agree with Gloria on this idea that order, structure and continuity and this binding is what makes the European Union
Yeah, I think it's a basis, but I would add, like you were saying, Peter, what's the added value? Like what does the European Union an interesting project? I think that the European Union will be an interesting project as far as we will be united in diversity, not united in only one way of thinking or trying to reduce some particulars from different countries. I think for me, the key of European Union is that we can share some institution, stability, continuity, but with particularities. We have some official languages, different gastronomy, different cultural rituals, and we still feel like we are a whole group, a united group. So the added value, I think, it is the united in diversity.
And it seems to be really, in the case of Hungary or Poland, the tricky question: how far can diversity go, even in the interpretation of the order and the law, and how much order and law has to be common? That's always a tricky thing, but oscillating between the two seems to be what the European Union is good for. And is it that Ukraine would decided to find the European Union, or was it something else?
Well, I was actually thinking that maybe even not only for Ukraine, but for Central Eastern Europe, as in general, the European Union and the part of Europe which it unites was and sometimes still is rather a dream than a fact. And quite a few times during the summer school, I was quoting and I was referencing one of the essays of famous Czech writer Milan Kundera, The Tragedy of Central Eastern Europe, which he wrote in 1984. And there he brought up examples of 1956 in Hungary, and then we have a Prague, we have 1968 in Prague, and we have the Revolution of Dignity in 2013 in Ukraine. And I think that for us, the European Union, as well as Western Europe, was rather somehow a result of our imagination. It was the image that we built up in order to have something to fight for, because it's like building your identity when firstly you have to define the other. And as the other, we decided to define the Soviet Union and this eastern part of our identity, because we were and we still are kind of traumatized by it. So we had to find another way. We had to find someone to believe in. This belief, like in the European Union, the image of it, the fantasy of it, image and our fantasy that we fought for. And as something more concrete, I would say that maybe it will come across as something cynical, but I see the European Union as a temporal decision. Because I think that nothing in this world is forever. So everything is temporary and everything has its limits. And as everything else, every alliance, sometimes it's about power dynamics. And when power dynamics shift in this world, when new countries come to power, when new countries appear on our maps, geographical or cultural, we have to redefine the alliances so they become like they work. Because when we leave them in stagnation and we ignore the problems and we ignore this need to reintroduce values, reintroduce this mental frontiers of ours, we're just stuck, kind of.
Doris, when we were walking through Assisi, you said something about what is missing to Albania to be able to be a good candidate for the European Union or be a member of the European Union, which is time. And how do you see this question of power dynamics and time? What are the expectations of Albania in terms of European Union?
The question is, like, you're giving me the power to talk about our Europe as an Albania right now, but I think it's political, of course, kind of perception to it. But I would refer to the time, which is also not only a political stand, but it's also kind of a social construct that develops, of course, into a political choice. like Albania in the last years since the 90s has been and is still defined as a state in a transitional democracy in a way. And one of the main problems that we have is corruption. At the same time, we have also migration and a loss of like a brain drain to the country. But when we were thinking about time is because every year there are changes being made. There are changes at the beginning. There were changes because you had to get out of the communist structure. Then there were changes because we had the 97 crisis with the pyramid scheme and the collapse of economy. And it was not only an economic drop, but it was also a social drop because many families were robbed of their incomes and were robbed of their money. So we had many crises during this time, and every year we have had this need of changing. And the last year it has been because in order to become part of the European Union, so we have the influences of many foreign European and non-European embassies, and also the European Union per se. And it's been an ever-evolving, and that's the issue now. Like, we need time to just base it, like we need time to just digest it in a way and to make it more tangible to the place, to Albania, so to the place we want to put these policies into action. Even though they are really good policies, they are really like really Western and really progressive, and we really need them. The point is that sometimes it lacks on timing. And this is what I think that Albania needs right now. Like, we need to just slow down a second, like look where we're at, and also define on what our priorities are. Because with an ever-changing political scene, with the crisis, of course, that are global and European economic crisis that affect us, and with really high rates of migration, we don't have, like, we're not catalyzing every aspect and variable that we have right now. And even the best project is not being so tangible and constructed in a good and stable basis. That cement that, in a way, we talked about the European Union. That cement of our base, of our house, is not set yet, and we have to take the time to set it. Not rightly, it can be wrong. It can just fall off. No, it's not that. It's just to set it first, and then from there to build up and to try to come to a form that can't, like, even the form, like, of being part of the European Union, just to be there, like being part of the European Union. We as Albania need to adhere to the rules and the set of rules, but of course these rules have to be based on our diverse socio-economical background. So just a bit of time to construct it better.
Time to construct it better, time for adaptation, time to adapt to what the European Union stands for. Gabriel, your country is, from those who represent at the table now, the oldest member of the European Union. And you adapted well to the European Union? Has it been to be part of the Union?
Well, for me, it has been great. And I was born in 1998, so kind of years later, even with the euro, I have 4 years ago with the euro. So for me, I was talking to some partners here in the FUCE to look at some concrete advantages you have being a European Union, because maybe we stay maybe sometimes in the theories and philosophically, it's okay, we're here for to do that, but maybe the thing that I can travel to France to hear Gubbio only using my identity, national identity card, not even the passport. The thing that I can call some French, Dutch friend, for example. There's another advantage that, for example, Pierre could say you that it's so valuable as they don't have it then. So maybe in my case and in case of Spain, we are already here and we some cases only focus on the bad things of the European Union, only on the defects of the European Union. But when you meet other people that their countries are not in the European Union, they decide to be in the European Union, you start to value that. So for me, it's a great thing, and it's a great opportunity to meet people from other countries, like here in the summer FUCE, to get out your prejudices about them and to know. I would say, like, through the European Union, you could know better Europe. I would say traveling, getting in touch with other Europeans. For me, it's great. I have to admit.
And you were referring to a critical discourse which is prevalent in Europe, and speaking of the negative things, and there are many negative things that we will not ignore them, certainly, but it's also good to sometimes have opportunity to state how good it is to be with friends and people, and to be in a rich environment of many experiences coming from many places and so on. But nevertheless, we know that Europe is facing challenges. And I could imagine, Pierre, if you look now from your perspective, also from what you hope for Lebanon at Europe, and do you see some problems that Europeans are going to have?
Going to have, you're very far from, I think, from where we are already. So you need time maybe to reach these huge programs, and hopefully not. So I don't think so. But I think critique is nice sometimes, but appreciation is better. So yeah, really appreciate what you have, because maybe you don't follow up a little bit what's happening outside Europe. Maybe they don't show it on news or everything. But when I see the lack of difference between the European Union, which is a legal institution, an organized institution, and, for example, the Arab League, I see a huge difference. The decisions that they come up with and the decision that the European Union come up with, it's totally different. And for me, it's all about the small details. For example, I found it ridiculous to need a visa to travel to another Arab country. Why? In Europe, you have trains, transportations everywhere. You could connect easily to each other. So they are very, very more advanced from where we are. And I think that's it, what working in group means. So you are really like one hand and working with each other. And I think that every European country that wants to be part of the European Union needs to be heard, and if she's not capable of, to help her, because you need to work as your Europe and all together.
Rory, appreciation of Europe and European politics, is that what you have learned in South Africa and in Congo?
First and foremost, I would like to understand a bit more your question, as in, to what extent can we talk about appreciation in the sense of your question?
Thank you. So Pierre was speaking of appreciation as a way to look at Europe and to understand how this order that we were describing has been established and how it works in benefit of people.
Yeah, it's heaven.
It's heaven. Big word. But I frequently hear that Europe is also perceived as a power which is closing itself from the others, not allowing to share values and so on and so forth in a way that other people might expect. Is that something that you could confirm, or is it just a discourse?
I think that to a certain extent, first of all, internally, we can't deny that the European Union has a lot of vices in the sense where, for example, we have a European Parliament, but they only have consultational power. So at the end of the day, Europeans are represented by people in these institutions that are actually very powerful and that they did not elect. And I think that when we talk about Europe not being open to others or the critiques that maybe we can have as foreigners, I think that it's important to differentiate the union in itself as well and national politics. I do not think that we can construe, for example, Greece's constant rejection or Italy's constant rejection of migration and marginalization and racism, actually, to be more accurate, as being the stance of the European Union. The European Union also, we should know, is limited. We should not forget that we're still in a union of sovereign states. So there's actually the principle of subsidiarity and supranationalism. The union is only competent when national countries cannot do it themselves. So even if the European Union wanted to be more open to migration, wanted to be more open to integrating, for example, mere residents or mere workers that are just here to come and go, I don't think that they would be able to do that, because that's when the debate comes in of Brussels taking decisions for us. So I think that's why the European Union hasn't been able to act as much, even if it wanted to. So that's why I think that we could have appreciation, but in the same sense, I do understand that some critique, because we can only assimilate the national policies of European countries to the union as a whole, because they are what form the union.
And at a certain point, you said we have to understand what the European Union is and how it works, and then we can start to point at some differences, like the lack of democracy, point representation of the parliament. Would you agree with me that it is also necessary to understand what kind of power Europe wants to have? Is it really the same power that China, the United States, Russia are looking at, or do you see that there's something else at stake?
I think that's a very interesting question, because we saw, for example, in this course that we did in our local university, that Europe was called a political pygmy, in the sense where, for example, they have the ACP treaties with African countries, but their aim is not interventionism. We should distinguish the fact that Europe wants to have influence, but then even when they have treaties, for example, to help African countries, it is conditional, for example, on the respect of human rights and democracy. I think that Europe does not have that same, and Europe, first of all, in the Union, is not a state. And we should realize that it's still just a supranational entity, and it does not have the ambition to be as interventionist as the United States, as China, for example. Which is why I think that before, for example, we call out the union on its inactivity on certain purposes, we should first of all remember its constitution and why it was created in the first place. Many policies are economic. The union does not want to be intervening all over the place, and I think that we can even talk about the fact that it does not even have an army. It does not have a united army, because that is not the mission of the European Union. That is not what it cultivates for. But then when the Union does want to be a leader in a certain domain, for example, in terms of environmental neutrality by 2050, they do position themselves like that. But I think that we have not been able to accurately differentiate what is the ambition of its local countries and what is the ambition of the Union. To compare it, for example, we have Mercosur. We never say that, oh, Mercosur is not helping with democracy locally and everything, because that is not its vocation. So I think that in order maybe to even counter the rise of populism as we're knowing it today, each and every person should know that, yes, we have a union, but what are the functions and the missions that the union has committed to?
Gabriel, Gloria was speaking of Europe is still not a state or a nation. Is that a perspective for Europe to become a nation like the USA?
My point of view is that no, but let me explain. No, I think the best thing we can do is, in order to maintain this diversity we have, that this is a huge richness we have, we should maintain the national identities, but in order to avoid the Euroscepticism that we have, because we are aware about that, we have to have a efficient and a real cooperation between national institutions of the member states, because this is the thing that is failing right now. I feel like that, for example, maybe some trials in Spain are delayed because a judge in another country and the wrong way. So if we want to, one thing, not to lose our national identity, but on the other hand, want to be a strong community, strong European Union, I think that the thing that we should focus on in maybe 5 years in a short term is to make a better cooperation between national institutions.
We continue a minute on this, what might be further challenges of the European future. But I wanted to ask Anastasia again, one of the values that I attribute to Europe is peace. And you come in a moment of war. And Gloria was saying, what is certainly true, there is no European army so far. Europe has not invested in defense as its priority project. Is that a disillusion? Is that something that Ukraine, or you as coming from Ukraine, see critically?
I would say that there are lots of things that we're seeing critically in terms of resources that come from Europe to Ukraine, but not the army, because we have our own, and we're kind of proud of it. If I was to address the resources that come from Europe to Ukraine, I would mention that not so long ago, I actually saw this statistic, which seemed really interesting to me, because maybe as someone knows, since the beginning of full-scale invasion, Russian invasion on the 21st of February, Ukraine has showed an enormous level of solidarity and also volunteering services and volunteering work. I mean, one of our main activities is crowdfunding now, and it is now our national thing that we can crowdfund whatever we want. Not so long ago, we crowdfunded 3 Bayraktars, which are the military technique, actually a really costly one. And so I saw this statistic that said that 98% of resources that were used in Ukrainian, they were donated to Ukrainian army and supported the Ukrainian army, they came from inside Ukraine. And only 2% of them came from Europe. And it's not to say that we don't feel the support. We really do. I can even say that I am an evidence during the school, and the army is certainly not a problem. The thing that we expected from Europe to do and to stand up was about first resources, and we're receiving them. And the second one was a political power. And Gloria mentioned that the European Union claims to have power. Especially since in 1999, when Ukraine declared its independence and sovereignty, we gave up nuclear weapons in order to guarantees from really powerful countries, if I'm not mistaken, even the USA, that we would have our sovereignty protected. And then 2014, annexation of Crimea, Donbass, 2022, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and we don't see those guarantees fulfilled. What we saw instead in the first 3 days of the war was a rejection from some of the government, from some of the countries, because I remember that this conversation that was highly widely distributed and put in public discourse between one of Ukrainian ambassadors and ministers, German ministers, during the first hours of a full-scale invasion, when he asked to cut Russia out, to cut out SWIFT and declare sanctions immediately. And the minister said to our ambassador that we only had probably 72 hours to live. And it didn't make any sense to provide the help, to provide the support. And also, the thing with institution is really interesting. Also, if it's okay if I make some commentaries on what my colleagues have said. Yeah, because the questions you ask are amazing. There's a lot to think about. Because Gloria also mentioned institutions, and as far as I'm concerned, there are still institutions where Russia is present as a member, and they still have a right, like a veto right. And there was a case in some institution when Russia had veto on Ukrainians, and the work of our Ukrainian office was closed because Russia had a power of veto. And then Doris mentioned time, and I think that it is an interesting phenomenon for Ukrainians. Can you please turn off the mic? That's okay. Because I remember that Ukraine is kind of this ultimate experience when you have to build your independency from scratch, because we didn't really have, like, we only had a few years of independence in 1990s, and so we were kind of learning this from the beginning. And so I remember, and that is why during peace times and even after 2014, especially because of our double identities, and here I'm speaking on behalf of a generation that had a double identity and went through a drastic change of rejecting it since the full-scale invasion began. And I remember how in Lviv and in Kyiv, and I come from a Russian-speaking family, and I was like, Russia was the first language I spoke, I learned, I read in, and it was a shame that I studied Ukrainian language as a foreign one, and I learned it as a foreign one with perfect grammar, perfect literal sentences, etc. And then in Kyiv, I spent 17 years of my life. And when I was inside this circle and inside the environment, I noticed the changes. I noticed how young people started speaking Ukrainian more and more. And then I went to Lviv, which is a western part of Ukraine. And I spent a semester there, and I came back for my winter holidays to Kyiv, and I was just amazed. I was just astounded because there was almost no Ukrainian in a public space, even though we kind of published this law that forbade Russian language in public spaces, and not even in public spaces, but in services like restaurants, cafes, etc. And I felt like those changes, this time that we had taken and we were supposed to take, and that I felt like something that came natural when I went outside of the bubble. It suddenly, like, the context of the time suddenly changed, and also. And I saw this documentary on psychoanalysis of Ukrainians as a nation. Yeah, it is really interesting, actually. Yes, and it was filmed before the full-scale invasion, and it is really interesting because you can compare how the drastic was changed, and how roughly we shaped our identities before the 24th of February. And it said that Ukrainians, of course, they made some sociological surveys, and they made a conclusion that Ukraine was kind of a splinter nation, because when there's some catastrophe, like, we're a nation of catastrophes. When something happens, like the revolution of dignity and on the full-scale invasion, we're mobilized. We know what to do. We consolidate. But then when the catastrophe it doesn't end, but when this main point when we reach this main point and we have to get back to the everyday life, it suddenly turns out that we kind of still not used to create this everyday myth. Yes, and making them important. All of our myth are myth of catastrophes. And yes. Yeah.
Now I have a question, and you will be angry with me after this question. But and the question is for all of you. I have certainly the notion that the Ukraine war has changed many things, and our discourses, our perception, and so on and so forth. But as we are now in the time of, we are getting used to the war, to say it in a very bad way. I just wanted to ask if your perception is also that this is a moment of change for Europe, or do you think that it's just another episode like the Yugoslavian war that we had before? In Lebanon, you're struggling from one war to the other. So is that really, in your perception, something that will change the future of Europe? Maybe Pierre, you can start.
I think it will change, but for the better, because no, I don't know how the war will end in Ukraine and what will be the consequences after the war. But I hope it was not in this situation. But we saw as observers too from outside Europe the solidarity that the European Union and the meetings they did just after the war started, to not say another thing. So the meetings they did and how they are still doing till now. Like 1 week ago, the big presidents were in Ukraine talking with President Zelensky, and they are still working. If we are not saying anymore anything on TV, but it's still, I think, behind the scenes, if you can help me if it's true or not. So I think that it will help for better, and that they might find new strategies in the European Union, how to really prevent these wars and how to remain the peace and to continue the mission of peace building again in this continent. So,
Gabriel, what do you think? Up here, you hadn't switched your camera on. People.
May I still repeat a question? So may we take the European defense community from 1952 with a project of common military? I think this war, because in European Union, at least not in Europe, but in European Union, we have been living in a kind of heaven, without wars, without really big problems economically already, but not problems with these bellic problems. Maybe this could work as an alarm to us to maybe rethink this project, or at least to get the debate, at least to retake the debate and think about that. So I think, this could be the change, the direct change we have.
I don't know whether, Gloria, you have also.
First and foremost, I think that it will orchestrate change in the sense where the European Union, Ursula von der Leyen was saying that they can no longer count on a country that is openly threatening them. And she was talking about Russia, because Germany does depend to a certain extent on Russian resources. And that is why many of them were not able to take radical solutions. And so I think that there is change in political awakening. And we saw that Germany, for example, has been entering negotiations with Middle Eastern countries in order to get more of their gas, their petrol from them rather than Russia, because they see how unreliable and how aggressive Russia is by resorting to threats of using the nuclear weapon if ever they were to go against any of their interests. However, to react to what Gabriel said, I don't think that there will ever be like a European army, because I think it's important to remember that already in 2001, when there was not as much populism as there is today, there was the rejection of the Treaty of Nice. They did not want a constitution for Europe, meaning that each state, that certain states still wanted to conserve a margin of sovereignty. And part of that sovereignty is also control on military strategies, which is why today, especially where Europe is really faced with populism and Euroscepticism, with things like democratic deficit, etc., and also the claim of migration, creating a European army would be more suicidal than any other thing, because we see, for example, in France, that the far right has always been a bit ridiculous. They had maximum 10 deputies in our National Assembly, and now they got 89 places in the National Assembly, because they're instrumentalizing migration, they're instrumentalizing Europe. So what would be the benefit, what would be the aim and the positive outcome on a national level of having an army where people are playing on Euroscepticism in order to gain electorate? It means that reflects the way that people think. And let's not forget that the Brexit also happened as part of that. And that is why, for me, the debate will not happen as it pertains to having an army in the light of all of this.
Doris, you wanted to say something on this issue as well?
The question was a bit loaded in my opinion, and apart from like, it's a kind of you stand in a privileged point to when you think of war and when you think of conflict as a shaping mechanism, because even though you're talking about a really really harsh and really difficult situation. You mentioned the Yugoslavian, but of course also the coming out of the communist area also for most of the Balkans. So I think the main focus and when it pertains to this is like condemning war, and in a way to form like even the principles that we talked all these days, like communication and everything. And I think we can resolve to those before resolving to an armed and violent confrontation. But of course, and as we said in our group even today when we talked about this, it's a difficult notion, of course, to find a solution to it. But yes, first and foremost, I think that it shouldn't be war a shaping mechanism. We have to work on other mechanisms between one another in order to, and like the main focus should be condemning and this acts of aggression and violence.
So you're saying we don't want to get used to war. We will want to invest in other forms of negotiating and looking at the future. Anastasia?
Yeah, my approach, I really thank my colleagues for the answers and for the reflections, and that they still have Ukraine in their minds. And in those reflections that they presented, it is really important for me to hear and to think about. And my approach will be more a cultural one, because we have people more from this law, political management area, which is really cool because I know nothing about it. And I was thinking about how actually there is a change, but it's a change of information, of who holds information and who has the right to claim that the information is valuable and trustable. Because I feel like before, Ukraine was like in people's minds, Ukraine equaled Russia. And when they, even during first months, or even still, when they want to have an expert opinion on the Russian invasion, Ukrainian war, they invite Russians. And it turned out that actually Russians don't know anything about Ukraine, but Ukraine knows a lot about Russians, because we had this colonizer-colonized ties. And just as colonizer doesn't really put energy into knowing what he's colonizing, the colonized have to navigate through this, and they have to know what they're dealing with. And so I really feel like there is an emergence of this, I would not say trend, but I would say that Ukrainians slowly but surely gain this trust, especially from Western Europe, to be experts in something, and especially on the war that is happening in their country. And so it gives another perspective, at least in like this is one of the changes, that now you have a whole another view coming from a whole another part of Europe, and it is important and it is valuable, and it is important and it is heard, or at least we try to hear it.
Yes, thank you very much. On a balance between being afraid of what comes next or looking forward to what is coming, where would you situate yourself on that balance? And in which sense? So what would you be afraid of if you are more afraid? Or what would you be looking forward to if you are looking forward to? Doris? Yes, of course.
Thank you for giving me the first hit on this. I think I would start like mainly from what I expect in a positive sense. Let's say this. Pertaining Albania, I would really love to have a positive outcome during to be a candidate at last, and have a positive feedback even from Hungary that have the support of the European Union. But also pertaining a war that it's on in Europe, I would like. And I would hope for a solution, a peaceful solution, and a coming out of a really strong and independent Ukraine. That would be my hope and dream about regarding that part. On fears, of course, the war in Ukraine is one of those that it's affecting, and the fear is that it will affect for a long time a Europe that, as it was said, wants to be united, and it's based on union and diversity. But of course, it faces many radicalization on right or left wing. So it is something that it's a fear, it's ongoing fear. And another one would be the topic that it's being not only faced every day, but should be even more internalized in our policy making, in our doings, is the environmental crisis. We live in a world that is ever changing, and we have a set of rules of sustainable development goals set by the UN nations, and many countries are implementing them to their works and policy making. But I think we have to work more on these kind of utopian, maybe, thinking about them in the conversation we have today, maybe these huge ideals, but even though there are just some general phrases to them, I think there are it can be implemented to every country in a way or another, and I think we have to work on this issue and the crisis that if we don't fulfill the crisis that will come after that. One of them, of course, the environmental crisis, but also the sustainability of institution, gender equality, and many, many more.
Pierre, you want to continue?
Actually, Actually, and honestly, talking about Europe, I don't have a clear opinion because it's not my expert zone. I'm more in my region, so that's to start. But just to say in general, ups and downs are everywhere. So they might be like she said before, it's a period of fear, but I believe that they will come over it and they will fight to gain the place they were and even higher. So that's what I have to say. I really don't know. But for Lebanon, I think we do not have fear anymore. Really experience everything from an economic crisis. You can add, I have a lot of economic crisis, lack of electricity, wars with my neighbors, and wars we have in the south we have Israel and Palestine, and we are victim of this war, and we have in the north we have Syria. So we have a lot of migrants in my country that we know that it's not capable even to receive them. But as I'm seeing it right now, and as I said earlier, with this generation and the political, is really know how dangerous it is and how everything will change really fast, and no fear, and we're going to the end to gain the top, as Lebanon was 40 years ago.
Very impressive. Gabriel, please.
Yeah, so I think the key to understand this balance that you were proposing is unfortunately the war in Ukraine, and we can be afraid about this because we don't know how will it end, but I think also this war and the outcome could be interpreted as as a hopeful point, because this is the first time in so many years that the European Union has acted as a real union in the international sphere. You can remember with for example, the 2010 crisis, half Europe was fighting with another Europe, North and South, basically, you know. And I think this new situation of union could lead actually to a hopeful point for our union. So let's try.
Gloria.
Sorry to start on a negative point, but there are a lot of things I'm afraid of. First of all, we've seen in the United States, for example, that there's been a lot of shootings because a lot of people are afraid of the grand replacement. They think that Arabs and blacks are going to replace all the white people in Europe. And so they're becoming radical. They're against, for example, there's a famous person that you surely heard about, Eric Zemmour in France, that tells people that they shouldn't give names that are not on the French calendar. So he really wants to stay in a world where everyone's name is Mary, Joseph, and things like that. He doesn't want to accept that France is mixing. And so what I'm really afraid of is the degradation of the conditions for migrants, because we know that there are a lot of migration camps, for example, in Greece. And when you see the documentaries that are done, for example, by associations such as Human Rights Watch, their conditions are deplorable. So the union can give money as much as it wants, but if there is no monitoring, I am actually afraid to say that I'm not very hopeful about the evolution of their rights. We said it during this week that there are human rights in Europe, but then it seems as though outside of Europe there are no humans. A few weeks ago, we saw this massive massacre in Morocco, in which Spain actually helped. So you had hundreds and hundreds of black bodies lying on the ground, dead, some of them half dead, and just being surrounded by cadavers, and that was completely inhumane. They were beaten by the police. And these are things that migrants go through and that nobody talks about. And it's more than talking about it. I don't think that it's up to the civil society to always take it upon itself to fight for rights that should be guaranteed because they're contained in the Treaty on the European Union. And also, I think that what I'm afraid of is also that Europe will not be able to take a firm stance on its respect towards other nations. I think that Europe has been able to create respect between themselves, so not intervening in each other's internal affairs. However, Europe has turned the blind eye on what their respective nations do in other countries, for example, African countries. We know that France is always intervening over there. And I would just like to remind that in history, if the League of Nations failed, it's also because nobody was doing anything about Italy invading Ethiopia. And what are we doing right now when France is actually always meddling in West Africa, sometimes giving weapons to terrorist groups and all this for their interests? I think that it is good to portray Europe as this union that has achieved a lot. It is true, they have achieved a lot, but they have not achieved for those that are Black, for those that are Arab, for those that are Muslim, that are part of Europe now. Europe is no longer Catholic and just solely white, and they're not including these people in the debate. For example, in France, we removed the word race from the constitution because we said that there is only one human race, which is true. However, there are a plethora of skin colors, and by invalidating the notion of race, they've just invalidated the reality that Black people go through in France. And I think that amongst other European countries, a lot of minorities could say the same.
I've always been very in favor of eliminating the word race, but I'm very aware that eliminating the word does not mean that racism disappears, and that cannot be the way to solve the problem. Maybe so far, I would say sometimes we lack experiences to share hopes or to share what we are looking for. As we do not have your experience to say something like no fear anymore. On the other hand, it is much more common and good and certain to agree on what we are afraid of. And I think these 2 or 3 things which have been mentioned so far, the environmental challenge or threat, and then all which is colonialism and the relation of Europe to the world is certainly something that has to be thought through, and there are many, many difficult and dangerous and negative things to face in the future. I don't know, I'm quite nearly certain that between hope and fear, you are on the side of hope.
Well, in terms of our country, of course, like we have no other choice. It was always our weapon, hope and actually love, because I think that the volunteering services, the amazing support for one each other, the reaction that we had towards the Russian invasion in the Ukraine, it just shows that love and hope are our main drivers to achieve something. And also, I think it is kind of, we kind of been there already as a country that spent a majority of its history between 2 empires and between 2 sides of the Cold War, and then it seemed like the Cold War never ended. And we still feel like, I guess sometimes we can still feel like there's just 2 huge powers, and you're either with one of them or with another one. But we've been there and we're still here. So I don't see that we have any other choice but to win and to survive and to get even better, because I can see how first of all, Ukrainians are getting recognized in international community as like our academics, our scientists, our philosophers, our I don't know, data developers, etc. I see how the world decides to help us, because I know there were quite a few announcements on the projects from different architectures that wanted to rebuild the cities that were ruined by Russian army. But also I know the fear. It's just that we're kind of used to it, and it's not a whole thing to say that you're used to fear and you're used to the violence in your history. I think that I've mentioned this during our courses, that when you're going through the history of Central Eastern Europe, even in schools, you always see wars, you always see repressions, you always see the executed renaissances, one after another, and you're still so used to this idea of violence that when it happens, you're surprised, but not really. But on one hand, I would say that it gives us more spine. I would say it's like an armor. So when violence happens and when war happens, we know what to do and we're prepared to this, because we know that this violence never became abstract and we never tried to make it invisible. But on the other hand, I think we all have our anxieties, because this idea of having 2 powerful two powers and being in between of them is still a thing in Ukraine, because if you're not in NATO or say European Union, you can just be devoured by Russia, and just dissolving those those power imbalances would be a really great perspective on the future. And we just kind of still don't see this happening, and that's okay, because as Doris mentioned, we need time. Time is a thing in every case, political as well. But also, I feel like this may take a little too long, especially considering that we have Europe has the western part of Europe is still at this issue with paying Russia for gas. I remember how we had to fuel our car, my mom and I, because we drove to the summer school from Ukraine to Italy. And of course, we had to fuel our car. And as a Ukrainian, I'm used to Google companies that I'm buying products from, because you never know whether they still in doing business with Russia. And I found out that all, if not all of the gasoline stations, but at least majority of them in Italy are still paying to Russia in euros, and it kind of felt not ethical to be traveling to the summer school that is called European Humanism and then paying for a genocide of your nation. And also, when Gloria mentioned the First World War, I had my own parallel, if I hope that's okay, in the Second World War, because I remember how this thing when Europe kind of gave up, so that's for Hitler, and they didn't even call people from the country to make a decision. And I also remember that one of the recent statistics, that France and Germany were one of the two big countries who supplied the biggest amount of percentage of weapon to Russia. And there are some things that might feel scary, but also it also about hope that you can break the chains of history, even if it seems like utopia once again.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have one last question for all of you, but before that, I wanted to give you the opportunity maybe to ask questions to your colleagues, or also taking from the audience questions, if there is any question that he wanted to put to your colleagues.
Us to them.
To your colleagues, or but yeah, please.
Are you also talking about how sometimes there are various ways that there are no Europes as a non-human side of Europe regarding humanism. But I was wondering, to what extent can it be a European responsibility what is happening in the rest of the world?
That's for you, Gloria.
We had a hero that wanted the nationalization of our mines, and he got executed. In Nigeria, we had a Kanseriwa as well that was fighting for the rights of the Ogoni people, and Total was in their part polluting their water when they're already very marginalized in Nigeria. And I can give you many examples. And when these people are executed, it's many times for commercial reasons, and it's many times because of interventionism and also threats that they get from certain European countries. And I cannot say for all of Europe, because not every European country is interventionist. For example, I know we spoke about it, that Portugal, for example, is rather respectful towards their old colonies, but that's not the case of France. If you look, for example, at even what happened in Libya, that can be partially explained by the fact that they just wanted access to certain concessions, and so Gaddafi had to go. But look at what Libya is today. It is a very fertile ground to terrorists. So when France and French, I wouldn't like to say France, but when radical politicians start saying that Africa is busy pouring itself in France as if it wasn't their fault to a certain extent, I feel as though it's very hypocrite, and that they should take responsibility and take a choice and say that if you don't want people to come, let us be respectful and allow them to develop their own democracy and institutions. Even if they fail at it, that's fine. But let's not be the cause of that failure and then start complaining when they actually look to us for a better world.
If there are no further questions in the moment, yeah, you? No? Okay. So my last question is a kind of exercise. So imagine you are invited to organize the next FUCE Summer School on European Humanism in the Making. And you have to choose from all the group two colleagues with whom you would like to work and to develop the concept of the summer school, would you be able to name or to say why these two people? Would it be funny?
We'll just offend everyone. That's a
Yes, no, you don't offend anyone. You just to good reasons to choose someone. Doris is.
No, I'm not ready to decide. I was more about like you want to start the conflict within the year.
No. I reformulate my questions. That's a pity because it has. You would go? Would you go with an answer? No. Okay. Okay, I don't want to cause any bad feelings for anyone. So maybe one advice that you would give for the next summer school to make a topic or something different. Where should we pay more attention? So let's go that way. And a very short sentence, not very complicated idea. You can start, Gabriel, please.
For example, we should keep talking about the not comfortable themes or topics that we treated here. For example, with Ali conferences with the Islamic world and the relations with Europe. Maybe in Western Europe, especially, we're not so used to treat Islam, to treat and to understand the other, and to kind of relate the other, but in a not just the opposite, but wanting to understand and to share. So I could keep by this path.
Can I?
Yeah, please go.
So yeah, it was only a joke pertaining to a new conflict. No, regarding the topic, maybe coming from a business background, I think, or a policy-making kind of a setting of my workings, I would like, apart from having these discussions and these provocations in a way, like this really not so cute, if we can say like that, topics, but it's like a problematic that they are brought to the table. I would think that making it more tangible, like making and having like building on the fact of how we can affect policy, how we can make policy, and of course understand more on the economic background, like why in a way there is the war in Ukraine, why it was the war in the Balkans, why there was a conflict and still is a conflict between Kosovo and Serbia, because Serbia is not, and not only Serbia but other European countries are not haven't already recognized the independence of Kosovo. So I think it can be brought even to a more tangible approach and like an action based, because I think it was something that we all kind of mentioned, that for like Europe has to take action. It was one of the things that we said in our group when we were talking about peace as the cement of Europe, and we said we have to do more. It's not like only like this ideal, like to pertain to this idea, we have to act on it in a constructive way, of course. So I think maybe a practical side to it more. Like this.
Okay, Pierre, please.
For me, I think that, like Gabriel said before, sensible topics are really important to share with each other. And I think overall it was really good and a really nice experience. But more on technical concept, I think that more time together, like the free time together, it's what matters the most, more than courses. I think that's where what we learn and how, you know what I mean. So or maybe changing groups every day, like not the same groups for 5 days, like we can rotate. I didn't have the chance to meet everyone personally. And I think that's a bit sad. And yeah, that's it. More free time together and enjoy together, because that's what's more.
So I understand my former question, whom you would like to invite to organize, would be, your answer would be everyone.
Everyone. I love you all.
That's good. Maybe Gloria?
Yeah, I agree that it was very good in the sense where we saw it was interesting to have professors that are outside of my field. So to suddenly be like reintroduced with a more philosophical and maybe romantic way of doing things with the narration and everything. Yes, yes, a lot of narration and just analyzing society through the lens of art, because literature is art. But then on the other side, I think that a lot of great minds are here, and I think that we are all different, and it would have been the occasion to do something positivist in the sense where concretely maybe we could be put in contact with, even if it's a non-governmental organization that does something, and just to exchange and present our ideas. Maybe they could tell us that what we've been saying from the beginning is wrong, and then we would be able to change our perspective. But I think that many of us are passionate about a certain cause, passionate in one way or another for Europe. We disagree and agree on certain points. And I think that on a positivist way, we could write maybe a resolution, as they do in certain forums, and present them to bodies that actually work within these fields.
And I am very much in support of that. You all were saying we need more action. It has to be taken further from the philosophical, romantic, I don't know, reflection that we were having, and actually at least a resolution that we can present to FUCE and from FUCE to other instances within universities and the church maybe could be a first step. Anastasia, very short, please. We are running out of time.
Yeah, I know. I will be really quick on that. Because my idea was, I was going through the summer school with this thought that I really miss having professors not only from the Western universities, although we all have different backgrounds, but I also thought that we have such a wide diversity in students, and that's why our conversation were so productive, and why they really brought us to reflect. Or we're not the only one in Europe or inside of Europe, and maybe I would like to have this different approach even in our lectures.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very good perspectives for the next organization. We have announced this roundtable with a sentence like, the students may not be experts, but they bring in the future perspective of what it be. But after this discussion, we should correct the text and certainly say at least what Gloria was saying, that great minds have been speaking here, and certainly to the point that you really have a very, very valid expertise in what Europe is and is coming to be. So thank you very much. I think we should close here. Everything should be closed sometime. And I also take the opportunity to say that I'm not be with you tomorrow because I have to travel tomorrow already. But it was a big pleasure, and this roundtable was certainly a moment in which we can imagine what it is to be European in the 21st century, and the many things you do not only have to think, but actually to do. And thank you very much for that. And to the audience outside, bye-bye. Thank you for being here. And bye. Ciao.